Okay, so next on our agenda, and I don't want to kill too much time here. Um, Dr. Katie Flynn, I hope you're able to unmute.
Yep.
Yep, cool. So Katie, I will let Katie introduce herself. Clearly, everybody here will know who she is. But Katie wants to talk to us about some of the efforts underway at the U.S. Animal Health Association.
Cliff, can you see my slides?
We sure can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Cliff, for the opportunity. As Cliff said, I'm Dr. Katie Flynn. I am actually the state veterinarian of Kentucky, but I'm here to present on behalf of the U.S. Animal Health Association Committee on Equine, as well as state animal health officials. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the U.S. Animal Health Association Committee on Equine. And the purpose is to address and seek solutions to infectious disease issues that can compromise the health and welfare of the nation's equine population. As part of its purpose, the committee undertakes to keep USHA members, USDA, the horse industry, and other stakeholders informed of topical disease problems confronting the industry. The committee also serves as a sounding board for discussion on equine health related issues and for the development of strategies and solutions to resolve such problems. So I just want to give you a quick overview of some of the activities that we have had going on in the Committee of Equine. Some of these have already been alluded to by our USDA counterparts as we've been working very closely with them on some of these issues. But I'd also like to draw your attention to a couple questions and issues that the state animal health officials have for the American Horse Council and members of the American Horse Council, as well as others on this call today. So we do have a monthly regulatory stakeholder call, the National Equine Conference call, held on the second Thursday of every month. We've had 2 equine forums that we hope to have again as a follow-up, equine identification and equine disease. We've had several working groups or subcommittees over the years. Currently, we have an equine viral arteritis subcommittee, as well as an equine import subcommittee working group. Our previous subcommittees led to the production of a guidelines document for equine herpes virus. We have a previous subcommittee that worked on equine pyroplasmosis, specifically looking at the import testing, changing in that protocol to include both the CF and C. ELISA testing, as well as the treatment protocols. We've had a contagious equine metritis subcommittee to look at some of the issues. And we thank USDA for having their monthly conference calls with our contagious equine metritis points of contact in each of those states. Each year, U.S. Animal Health Association works on a resolution process, and that resolution process can direct an industry or some government agency to do something for the Committee on Equine, specifically related to equine issues. So just to give you a heads up on stuff that we're working on this year as far as resolutions, which will be presented at our annual meeting in October. There's going to be a virtual component to that annual meeting, as well as an in-person component where we will vote on these resolutions. So the resolutions that are being proposed, we're asking USDA to develop an accreditation module on foreign equine diseases. They have done a great job on the domestic equine regulatory diseases, as well as including some information on pyroplasmosis, as well as contagious equine metritis. However, we'd like to focus this one on African horse sickness and some of the challenges in the diagnostic testing that we have on import for Dorine and glanders. We also want to have some information for those private practitioner accredited vets that are working inside the ports, so they understand the risk of some of those importation disease potentials. We're also looking at discussion of a resolution on import testing for domestic diseases. So after the EHV situation in Europe, the USDA graciously and did a great job of coming forward and changing some of their import protocols to allow some of the horses to be tested for EHV through their permitting process. So we're looking at expanding that to a non-EHV outbreak situation, but more routine availability of such testing. We're also looking at tiered referral hospitals for imported horses because we've recognized the challenges of horses that are in import quarantine that need to get medical care. And there's very few hospitals right now available for those quarantine facilities. So we're looking at asking USDA to work on a tiering process so that if horses test negative for the import diseases, but still have fevers and need to have additional quarantine testing and care, that we have some level of quarantine facilities that aren't as stringent as those that have horses that haven't tested negative yet. For all of our activities in the past and all of our resolutions in the past, please visit our usha.org infectious diseases of horses website. Some current activities that I just wanted to highlight, our equine movement working group has been working on. We did review the guidance documents that Dr. Popkowski did mention, the 13402.1 and 13407.2, and to provide our insight from state animal health officials. We want to commend USDA for working with us on some sick horse protocols, or we like to call them adverse health events, so that we're routinely tracking these horses and these health events so we know what's going on in these horses that are being imported and how we can better care for those horses and pay some attention to what is causing some of their health issues. As I mentioned before, we're looking at testing of horses in the import facilities and how can we better protect our horse population, not just from those imported diseases, but some of those endemic diseases, such as influenza, strangles, and equine herpes. However, we also know that once we do test those horses for those diseases, we do have the potential for those horses to test positive. And we want to discuss some of those releasing of those horses into the states, as it's been quite a challenge to release some of these horses that are going to states that won't accept a horse that's got either a EHV positive or a strangles positive. So we're wanting to work not only with USDA, but states on how we can facilitate the movement of these horses into the states and put them under some type of quarantine facilities or protocols within the states, so that we're not looking and placing the burden on the states that have the import center. We're also looking at addressing some of the biosecurity measures. And again, this one isn't just at the imported horses or post-import of these horses, but looking at the bigger picture, because that is another focus of our committee on equine, is how do state animal health officials assist the industry in some of their biosecurity measures. Going back to what Dr. Pelzel-McCluskey said, how do we address some of these biosecurity measures that aren't being taken when we talk about the iatrogenic transmission of some of these disease agents? So what we're doing in 2021, our committee meeting this year, we're going to have a virtual meeting, as I said, as well as in person. Through our virtual meeting, we're going to have scenario-based discussions where we're going to present these horses test results and have the discussion on states on how they're going to handle whether it's a non-clinical EHV1 horse that has just been tested because the owner requested it, and how that horse should be handled as compared to EHV1 positive in a clinical respiratory case or neurologic case. So really what I'm here today to highlight some of the questions I have for you as an industry. In light of the EHV1 outbreak at equine events in Europe, how is the United States prepared for this? And this question came up to several state animal health officials, where industry was coming to state animal health officials asking for guidance and information. And the question comes up after that from some of the state animal health officials is, does the industry see a need for veterinary assistance in tailoring biosecurity for equine events and facilities? Is there enough veterinary guidance out there and veterinarians interested and willing to do this work and able to do this work and provide that guidance to the show, saying, okay, here's the plan and what happens if there's an outbreak, what is needed and what should be done? Is there enough guidance in those areas across the country so that state animal health officials and industry work together on that issue? And so the next question is, does does the industry have adequate biosecurity support from the veterinary community? So I ask this for you all to think about, provide us feedback, as well as maybe in our closed session, Cliff and David, we could actually have this further discussion, because this is what the state animal health officials are looking at, is do we have enough resources and where do we go? For many of you, you know that my area has been equine biosecurity specific to the equine event. However, transitioning from California to Kentucky and becoming the state veterinarian, I have taken on a lot of duties that will not allow me to help a lot of the facilities do their biosecurity plans. In that I don't have that time, nor do I know their facilities, as I'm not able to go around to those facilities. So I just want you to start thinking about that, because that outbreak in Europe did cause significant concern to the industry, specifically far reaching all the way to here into the United States, when we're talking about bringing those horses back to the United States or having those horses compete within the United States. So I just think I would like to throw that out there for further discussion from this group. So with that, that's all I have to say, Cliff.
Thank you very much for the presentation. We really appreciate it. We will definitely take those 3 questions back to the committee and expand on them there. Throw it out for any questions regarding USAHA's committee equine efforts. I will frankly say I am a member of that committee. I've been, there's several health and regulatory members who are also members of that committee. And I'm really proud of the way that committee has grown over the last 4 years. And I'll also note that every time USAHA has a equine symposium, the American Horse Council gets a new project. So the collaboration between our organizations and all the members of those different committees is very important. And, you know, we're all one big happy team, but their ability to bring in the state animal health officials has been critical to a lot of American Horse Council projects in the past 5 years. So thank Katie for her time today and all of the time she has given to this group in the past. And eventually we'll start suckering Joe into some of these meetings, but well, we got Katie, we'll use her.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So the next presentation we have scheduled for today, if I hope I'm back up. Oh, skipped one, is Dr. Nat White is going to provide us with an update on the Equine Disease Communication Center. Dr. White, are you able to unmute?
I am unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear. Loud and clear.
I don't have a PowerPoint, but I have the notes that I sent out. I will try to screen share if that's okay.
That's fine if you'd like to do that.
Can you see that?
Yes, sir. We certainly can.
So thanks for the time to be able to present this. This is an update with several parts to it. And if anyone wants this, hasn't received this, because I know the committee did, but if others that are attending want this, ask for Cliff, or you can send to me and I'll happily provide you with a copy. We remain our goal to have alerts sent out to the industry on outbreaks, as well as to provide educational material. And in fact, we hope we'll become the universal source for information on infectious disease and biosecurity for both owners and veterinarians. Currently, our statistics, we've had, since starting, 4,700 cases or outbreaks. Sometimes there's more than one horse in that. We've got 8,600 email subscribers and 16,000 Facebook followers, 550 followers on Twitter. Last year was a bit of a dip in the number of horses that were reported on. The most were in 2018 and 2019 with 5,024 and 524, 523. We're on course to hit that again, I think, this year, as far as the number of horses affected in outbreaks. We are trying to upgrade our database. USEF is providing the technical expertise to do that. And one of the things we want to do is to have the submission form, which is currently on the website for veterinarians to submit a case, to have that directly input the information into the database. The other part that we're trying to do is to improve the search function of this database. Our goal is to have it available for people that want to search for particular diseases, locations, dates, and so on. It's able to do some of that right now, but it needs to be expanded. So that's one of our goals for this year, to try and have that completed. As far as disease submissions, we still are not getting all the submissions we would like. The practicing veterinarian, we have very few really that supply cases, whereas the state veterinarians are increasing their participation. We still think there's some more out there that aren't sending cases, but we'd like to get them to help us get as many cases in the database as possible, and obviously have the alerts go out. We are also trying to improve our website to make it user-friendly. It works very well, but we think we could do better. Since starting, we've had overall to the website more than 1.2 million views. The alerts page gets the most of those views, about a million views. In this year, we've had 77,000 views on the alert page, whereas to the web main homepage, it's only been about 16,000. Our goal is to include more videos, more photos, and we have started producing individual disease pages. So one of the first ones we did was an EHV1. So when you go to that disease on our website, it brings up the page with all the information, biosecurity, links, so that it's a one-stop shopping for that particular disease. So we'll see more of that as we try to revise the website and go to that sort of format. We've done other things on Facebook. We've put on 7 new diseases on the information page, and we still have about 11 to go. We are asking veterinarians and organizations to distribute the owner fact sheets. These are available on the phone app as well as on the website. And hopefully the veterinarians can distribute these to the owners and helping to have them understand what's going on with the disease and the biosecurity needs. We do have the AAP guidelines linked to the disease page. And so if you go there, veterinarians can link to the AAP guidelines site, or they can use the owner fact sheet. We have had help in some of the EDCC alerts being shared, one on equi-management, which has been very helpful. Equus has done some of that, and ProMeds occasionally will list us as a source. We're trying to increase our marketing, both because to get the information out about the EDCC, but also to help with fundraising. So we're publishing articles and press releases. We're trying to advertise to the AAP members the benefits of this and get them to send us cases. And we're increasing our Facebook infographics to try and help with fundraising, but also, again, to get the owners to understand what we're doing. We have added to the alert page or a way to get donations. And so as far as fundraising, we put a goal for 2021 of 150,000. That number is coming from what I anticipate to be the budget in about 3 years. And we'll talk about that with the budget. We've added a donation button to the alert emails in hopes that people will recognize we're still seeking funding. We're approaching some of the larger hospitals, veterinary hospitals, with hopes that they will help us fund, and we've got about 5 as of now. The EDCC advisory committee, they are helping with the fundraising effort, We've asked them to provide prospective donor names and introductions and to coordinate making requests with us at EDCC. The other thing we'd like to do is get organizations or companies to highlight their support of the EDCC, perhaps on their messaging, perhaps on a website. We hope that this is a mutual branding that will help us and help the industry to understand that we're here, but we also need funding. The American Horse Council has an effort for an incentive plan to collect funds for research in EDC. I might ask Julie to make a comment on that at the end. I'm not exactly sure of the status, but I know it's something that the Horse Council has been working on. The elephant in the room is the budget. We are switching to a fiscal year of July to June. And this is because of the Foundation for the Horse budgeting effort now. And you can see here on this scheme what we expect the budget to be, particularly for this coming year, is going to be $120,000. The increases in the next 2 years is to add a veterinarian to this service. As of now, I'm on basically 7 days a week. No problem with that, except I won't be able to keep it up forever. And so we need another person that can do the approvals and can make sure that the information is accurate and take over halftime as far as processing these alerts and helping with the information that's on the website. You can see here we put in quite a bit of money for technology in this next coming year. That's the website and updating on the database. That won't be as much in the following years. So that's a brief report. Again, if people would like to have this handout, I'm happy to send it to anyone. We hope that people will continue to support us. I've been very pleased with the support we've gotten this year. As of to date, we've raised about 74,000 from January to now. If people repeat like they think we will, there's another 30,000 we expect. And then there are some we're not sure if they will repeat, but there's probably 20,000. So if we're fortunate, we potentially can meet our budget. But this is a never-ending process. And I would ask that this committee consider that we need to have a strategic plan, that we need to consider how we can have a sustainable source of funding, and ask the questions: are we cost efficient? Are we making an economic impact? And these are things I think we need to consider in a strategic plan. We talked about doing one in 2020, but obviously COVID stopped us from doing that. But so we'll be asking for help from the Horse Council to get some of that done. Happy to do any questions. See if I can stop sharing.
Thank you, Dr. White. I appreciate the update, and I will notice, or I will make aware of the impact that the EDCC had during the herpes virus outbreak uproar we experienced earlier this year with the European outbreak, and then the completely separate, totally unrelated incidences that we had here in the United States at around the same time. There was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of questions being asked. There was a lot of media attention, and having the Equine Disease Communication Center exist, but also having it exist with the track record that it has and the reputation that it's created was really, really critical to at least the American Horse Council's response to media questions and things like that, but also social media impact. You know, being able to just add a link to the EDCC that answered everybody's questions in a standardized way, I think really helped and tamped down some of the social media explosiveness. So I want to thank you and everybody involved in this process. We've got USEF, we've got AAEP, Lots of donors, lots of different organizations that have contributed to this and made this a reality for the last 5 years now.
7 years. We're starting on year 7.
Yeah. So it's,
I might add that when that herpes started in the United States, we got an increase in the number of email subscribers right away. So people are listening. and
I every single time I got asked for an interview, I dropped the EDCC 6 or 7 times. So it got included. A link got included in every article I was a part of. So thank you very much for all your time. I don't see any questions now, but again, to Dr. White's point, if anybody that has not already received that report would like that report, please feel free to reach out to me, and I will send it to you immediately. Great. Okay, so I will. I accidentally started this ahead of time. I don't want to spoil anything for our next speaker. But our next speaker will be Dr. Peter Timoney. Dr. Timoney, can you unmute? Oh, you were unmuted.
I'm mute.
We can hear you now, sir. Oop, then we lost him.
Oh, shoot.
Nope, you're here now. You're good. Don't touch anything.
That's crazy.
Okay. Well, Dr. Timoney, again, another esteemed individual, part of our Health and Regulatory Committee that does not need an introduction. I will pass it along to you, and I will click along your slides as you see fit.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Cliff, and thank you to everybody for lasting in the several excellent presentations. I can only commend my predecessors on the program this afternoon. Excellent, excellent information. I've never sat down and participated in a Health and Regulatory Committee meeting when we've had such progress accomplished and such excellent information. It's very heartening to listen to what people are doing and the challenges that we're still faced with. But as time's of the essence, I've got 30 minutes, thanks to Cliff listening to me and allowing me some opportunity to talk about transboundary or foreign animal diseases. Before I delve into specifics, so to speak, a couple of general comments I'd like to make. First and foremost, the intent of this presentation is not necessarily to provide a status update on transboundary diseases of equines. At the outset, the diseases I will mention are not inclusive of all known equine diseases currently transboundary with respect to this country. Excluded are Hendra virus, Nipah virus, Japanese encephalitis, Geta virus, Borna disease, and I'm sure there are others as well. So I think it's important to mention these are a selection of diseases that, from my perspective, I'd like to address. Primary purpose of my presentation is, hardly surprising, to raise awareness of the existence of these diseases, number one, and two, the threat that each represents in terms of the risk of their introduction into the country. Interestingly, absence of incursion of such diseases over the years can lead to complacency over the risk that they represent. Notwithstanding that, we live in an era of ever-changing dynamics in terms of the volume of international movement of equines, as well as trade in wildlife, both legal and illegal. Important to remember. We're also living in an era of climate change, whose effects can alter the global distribution of transboundary diseases that are vector-borne. We have to take that into consideration. And certainly, without any exaggeration, there's a need for greater, wider awareness, not alone amongst equine practitioners, veterinary practitioners, but also amongst stakeholders in the equine industry, if we are to maintain the current health integrity of our industry and keep it free from the incursion of some of the diseases that I will be mentioning in the coming moments. So much for that. Cliff, if you could pull up the, yes. This is a tableau of the diseases I'm going to be talking about. And you can see here, it's truncated, it should be more than that. There should be a total of 9 of them. So I'm looking at them in terms of historical occurrence in the country, presence in the Western Hemisphere, yes or no? Are they vector-borne? Does the carrier state exist with respect to particular disease? And is there a vaccine, or are the vaccines available against each of the selected diseases that I'm going to mention? I'm caught for time, so what I'm going to do is literally, in a matter of a few minutes in each disease, try and just mention the high points. I'm not going to go into detail because there just isn't time to do so, especially with regard to the #1 disease in my considered opinion, and that's African horse sickness. Next slide. Cliff.
Yes, sir. I want to give a warning to everybody that the rest of Dr. Timony's slides are graphic, relevantly so, but there is some graphic photos of horses that are infected with very substantial diseases. And so if you do not wish to view these images, I would encourage you to minimize your screens now. I think that's warning enough.
Thanks for that, Cliff. Okay, the first disease is African horse sickness. Many years known to be a major disease in southern Africa. It's a disease found in the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's where the disease is in fact endemic. Every year, historical occurrence in the US, never, thankfully, and hopefully it never will be. It's not, similarly, it's not present and never has been present in the Western Hemisphere. The vector-borne disease, carrier state does not exist, and vaccines are available against it. 2 forms of the disease, one is called pulmonary, or 4 rather, pulmonary form, cardiac form, mixed form, where you have a combination of both pulmonary and cardiac, and then African horse sickness fever, which is extremely mild, if not inapparent. And here you see some images of horses explained, and there are only about 3 images per disease, exhibiting or showing the signs of both the pulmonary. Here on the bottom of your slide, this animal is expiring, and you can see a profuse blood-tinged frothy material from both nostrils. Up here, we've got 2 horses where you get tremendous edema, edematous swelling, and hemorrhage of the conjunctiva, which tends to prolapse and evert. And then in this case, you get tremendous accumulation of edema in the supraorbital region, and obviously tearing as well. So this disease, there are 9 serotypes. They're all antigenically distinct from it. It's a disease that's caused by an orbivirus belonging to the Reoviridae family. Very important disease. It's a disease that can cause devastating losses, as we saw, in fact, last year when this disease was discovered in Thailand and subsequently in Malaysia. The overall head count, so to speak, in relation to the outbreak in Thailand, 610 cases of the disease, of which 568 succumbed. So the case fatality rate was 93%. So obviously, if a horse becomes clinically affected with the disease, the outcome is invariably Dismo, the unfortunate animal. It's much kinder to euthanize the animal than to leave it either to survive, which a few do following symptomatic treatment, or else to expire on their own without any assistance. So with any further ado, I'm not going to spend any more time on that because I want to really come back subsequently with some final remarks in relation to this particular disease in question. Next disease I'd like to mention is glanders. As old as old. We're talking about a disease that's millennia in existence. Some of the references to this disease go back to the ancient Greek philosophers and so on, and medical forebears. So a disease that was known to occur widely, especially during time of warfare, where there was tremendously large cavalries associated with the opposing forces in conflicts, and glanders was invariably present. And we saw this even in relation to remount horses that left this country in many tens, hundreds of thousands, and went into service during the Boer War, prior to the First World War. And during the First World War, there were huge numbers left this country. And unfortunately, so many of them succumbed, not from glanders. Basically, they were basically killed from shell fire or otherwise. But it's a very, very important disease. It's a disease that's transmissible to humans, so it's a zoonotic disease. It has occurred historically in the United States, and it, to this day, is present in the Western Hemisphere. It is present in many of the states in Brazil. And so we need to be aware that, in fact, this disease can present in a number of different forms. Some of those forms are, in fact, described as either nasal, pneumonic, or cutaneous. And you see here on this slide an example of a nasal one over here to the top left, and likewise also cutaneous here on the top right. And then you can see the lesions, the skin lesions on the lower limbs of this particular animal, constituting what historically used to be referred to as, not as glanders, but farcy. And the importance of this particular manifestation of glanders is that it can be so easily confused with ulcerative lymphangitis and also streptococcus. So, and also, needless to say, with epizootic lymphangitis. So from a differential viewpoint, you need to be jolly sure that you're taking into consideration glanders where you're looking at an animal that's exhibiting these type of nodules along the lymphatics of the lower limb, but it can extend up in, and you can get lesions elsewhere in the body as well. It's not vector-borne. Carrier state certainly does exist. And in fact, there are carriers known to occur that basically are totally asymptomatic. And so this poses major problems when it comes to being able to detect or identify such animals where there is no clinical evidence that, in fact, the animal is ill at all. Glanders as a disease, I mentioned the primary clinical forms of it, tends to cause chronic infection, especially pulmonary infection in horses. But in donkeys, it's devastating. It causes deaths in the vast majority of the unfortunate donkeys that are or become infected with it. Vaccines, there are no vaccines available against it at this juncture. So highly important disease, not just purely and simply because it's zoonotic, but specifically because of the influence that it has on movement of horses, especially internationally. and will continue to be so. Next slide, please. Moving on, now we're going to talk very, very briefly. As I say, this is a very fleeting overview of these diseases, but it has to be of necessity. And this is Venezuelan equine encephalomyelitis virus. And here are some historical pictures of this sawhorse stance of a horse affected with VWE that did occur in this country, specifically in Brown County in Texas, in Southeast Texas, way back in 1971. And that was during one of the epizootics and indeed epidemics of VWE from Venezuela and also Colombia. And that disease swept up in through across the Panama Canal, up through Central America, up through Mexico, and in fact was only stopped and when it reached Brown County in Texas, due to the fact that the vaccine, the modified live vaccine TC83, was used to establish a cordon sanitaire beyond the known reaches of the disease, and that eventually stopped it. But it could have continued on if availability of vaccine had not been resorted to. It's certainly present in the Western Hemisphere. There are 6 subtypes of the virus, the most important from an epizootic and then enzootic epidemic viewpoint are subtypes 1AB and 1C. When those subtypes surface or emerge, then there is problems. Problems not alone for horses, but problems for human beings. And usually horses are sentinels that usually exhibit signs of VWE about 2 weeks before the disease actually occurs or is picked up in people in the region in which the disease is occurring. So an extremely important disease. It's mosquito-borne. It's a typical alphavirus, belongs to the alphavirus genus, Togaviridae family. A whole range of species of mosquitoes, from not just Culisine, Anopheles, Aedes, Mansonias, Serophora. All of these have the capability to transmit this disease very effectively. Interestingly enough, in comparison with the 2 diseases that Dr. Angela Pelzel-McCluskey mentioned earlier this afternoon, both Eastern equine encephalomyelitis and West Nile encephalitis, in which case both of those diseases, the horse, the affected horse or infected horse, is not an amplifying host. They are dead end or tangential hosts of each of those 2 viruses. But in the case of VWE virus, the horse truly is an amplifying host. Infected horses will circulate very high levels of this virus in the bloodstream and act as very efficient sources of the virus if they're fed upon by any of a very wide range of genera of mosquitoes. So it's vector-borne, carrier state does not exist, and there is a modified live vaccine that has been used, and also an inactivated adjuvant vaccine, T84. So it's extremely important, especially from the point of view of the fact that every so often this disease will occur, and it usually starts around the Gila Peninsula in Venezuela, and then spreads to Colombia, and then spreads further northwards. So one has to be conscious of it, not confuse it with either Eastern or with West Nile encephalitis. Next slide, please. Moving on. Durine is the next disease I'd like to mention. And some people think that Durine is no longer a disease that occurs anywhere in the world. Well, I'm sorry to say that's not the case. It does occur, and it does occur in various countries in Asia, in Africa, Southeastern Europe, and also in the former Soviet Union. It's caused by Trypanosoma equiperdum, and there's a very nice image of that was isolated from the urogenital mucosal surface of a case of this disease in Mongolia within the last 2 years. Facial nerve paralysis is typical of this disease as it advances. It's rather a very long incubation period, anywhere from 6 months up to 2 years. And unfortunately, unfortunate animals become very cahectic, and you can see in the top right an image of an animal that basically is absolutely, it's emaciated. It's in extremis. During the earlier stages, acutely infected horses, especially stallions, develop dematous swelling of the prepuce and of the external genitalia. And this, if it's untreated, but really the whole idea is not to treat these animals, because such stallions, in fact, are very effective transmitters of the trypanosome. And it's far, far better to, unfortunately, euthanize these animals before the infection spreads. If, in fact, some horses are not euthanized and allowed to live, even displaying some of the neurologic signs, they will become very neurologic very late on and display all sorts of central nervous system abnormalities before they finally succumb. So very important disease. It's one that's been around for a significant period of time. It did occur in this country up to 1949, when the last case was reported on a native Indian reservation in Arizona. So not that terribly long ago, but it did occur up to that time. So next slide, please. Old Faithful back again, contagious equine metritis. It's been mentioned several times this afternoon by various speakers. It again is one of those diseases we have to keep vigilant for. It has occurred historically in this country on a number of occasions. First occasion that we're aware of was in 1978, it having been introduced with 2 stallions into Kentucky in late September of 1977. The last major outbreak was between 2008 and 2010, and that was huge. There was over 1,100 exposed horses, significant number, 23 carrier stallions found amongst the exposed population, 5 mares that were chronic carriers, and that was associated with the stallion that came in, warm blood stallion, in late November of 2000, and was missed, basically. And due to, unfortunately, lack of appropriate biosecurity in certain stallion semen collection centers, the causal agent, Taylorella equigenitalis, it was spread. It spread either directly by the people that were performing various procedures, breeding procedures in mares and stallions and so on. And it continued to spread. It was not very clinically apparent, but there were some animals that were inseminated. Most of this was in warm blood or breeds in which artificial insemination was widely practiced, not in horses that were bred by natural cover or natural service. Caused major problems. Estimated cost before it was finally eradicated, somewhere in the region of 16 million. 1978, when it was here in Kentucky, it cost $1 million a day to keep the breeding sheds closed. It's not vector-borne. Carrier state exists, especially in the stallion, but can also occur in the mare. Vaccines, none effective available. Next slide, please. Interesting disease. It's Salmonella enterica abortus equi. Used to occur in this country up to the late 1930s, early 1940s, until it was eradicated, similarly in Canada. Still occurs in the Western Hemisphere. It's known to occur in Argentina, in Brazil, probably occurs in other South American countries. It's not vector-borne. Carrier state certainly does exist in both mares and in stallions. And very simple first-generation vaccines, kill vaccines, are very effective in preventing and ultimately aiding in the eradication of this disease wherever they've been used. But this particular agent has the ability, it has very much a predilection for the equine. It can cause abortions anywhere between 5 and 10 months gestation, usually between 7 and 8 months gestation, and no characteristic lesions initially. And then, unfortunately, if the foal is born alive, inevitably it's septicemic, and within a matter of 2 weeks develops polyarthritis and will succumb. So it's a very important disease where it occurs. I know the last outbreak that I have some knowledge of was down in Argentina, and they lost something like 31 out of 34, 35 pregnant mares. So it has the ability to cause significant losses. In the case of the stallion, it could cause significant issues and significant problems. It's can cause significant epididymitis, hydrocele, and eventually atrophy of the testes if it's not treated. So a very important disease. How does the agent transmitted? It's transmitted usually through infective fetal membranes and discharges, and other horses come along, they will ingest grass, herbage, or food that's contaminated with this discharge or otherwise, and they'll become infected, usually by the oral route. And in the case of stallions, obviously the transmission can also occur venereally at time of either natural service or artificial insemination with contaminated semen. Okay, next disease. So now we come to last couple of diseases to cover. This one is Surra. And Surra, unlike its close relative Durine is caused by Trypanosoma equiperdum. Surra is caused by Trypanosoma evansi. In fact, interestingly enough, the cause of Surra, evansi, was the first trypanosome infection of either humans or animals that was identified way back in the late 19th century by a Scottish veterinarian working in the Far East. There's no record to this point, of the historical occurrence of Surra in the United States, but it's certainly present, widespread in the Western Hemisphere, countries south of here. It's very much vector-borne. Carrier state does exist. And unlike its close antigenic or genomic relative, Equipertum vanci, is not transmitted venereally. It's transmitted by vectors, primarily biting flies. Very readily, so some scientists would argue that these are they do not represent separate species of trypanosomes. That they're one and the same. I don't know that that is the case. The epidemiology of these two diseases is so strikingly different. Here we're dealing with vector-borne disease, not a venereally transmitted disease, and one that, unfortunately, if it's allowed to go untreated, and there are different treatment modalities for SIRA that are used, it will succumb just the same as its counterpart in the advanced stages of Durine. It'll develop neurologic signs and will succumb. So it's affected animals, very depressed, loss of condition. Some of them are very anemic. But if they're treated, you can certainly mitigate the severity of clinical signs, but you will not successfully eliminate the organism or the trypanosome from the lymphatic tissues of affected animals. So as soon as you cease treatment, obviously you'll get reactivation of the organism, and these animals will be once more become, they'll be circulating the trypanosomes in their bloodstream. Next slide, please. Epizootic lymphangitis, the most horrible, disfiguring disease that I think one can possibly imagine. I don't believe there's any historical record of its occurrence in the United States, nor indeed in the Western Hemisphere. It is vector-borne, carrier state, doesn't really exist. There's no vaccine currently available. It is a disease that basically is recognized as causing either ocular form, cutaneous form, respiratory form, and finally asymptomatic carrier state. It's present in West, Northern, and Eastern Africa, Middle East, Far East, and it's devastating. A number of years ago, I was at a meeting in Ethiopia, and it was the most distressing experience I've ever had in my life to see these unfortunate animals so disfigured. And yet the owners could not dispose of them because they'd only one animal, one beast of burden, so to speak, to support their family. So regardless of how horrific these animals became, they still maintained them. And they were, in every sense of the word, beasts of burden. And some of these animals became so affected that they would just wander out into the streets and basically be killed as a result of ongoing traffic. So a horrible disease. It's caused by a fungus very closely related to Histoplasma capsulatum. Histoplasma capsulatum farcinomosum. Very easy to cultivate, but very, very difficult to eliminate because the organism can survive in the free living state in the environment. So unfortunately, if it was introduced into this country, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to eliminate it. Next slide. I don't know if I should spend time on this because Dr. Pelzel-McCluskey did a superb job of talking about nipvesicular stomatitis earlier this afternoon, except to just show some of the classical, and these are only some of the classical clinical signs that can be observed in affected horses. Lingual lesions, gingival lesions, coronary band lesions. It certainly does occur historically and has in this country going back over many years. Dr. McCluskey has given an excellent overview of that and the characteristics of recent occurrences of the disease. It can overwinter at certain times. It's certainly present in the Western Hemisphere. Both serotypes, Indiana and New Jersey, are present in the southwestern parts or states of Mexico and Oaxaca and Chiapas, and also in Costa Rica and other Central American countries. It's certainly vector-borne. She's already described simulids or black flies, midges, Culicoides species, and are extremely important in terms of its transmission, and to a lesser extent, sandflies. So very important disease, one that certainly figures prominently, especially if it occurs in cattle or in swine, because it clinically resembles foot and mouth disease. So next slide, please.
That's the end of your slides, Dr. Timoney.
Yes, I'm going to just mention the last disease I was going to mention was equine paraplasmosis, but we've been given a wonderful presentation about paraplasmosis by our colleague, Dr. Pelzel McCluskey. So rather than be repetitious and go over that, I think she's educated us all as to where we stand with regard to that disease. But at this point, this disease is not known to be naturally transmitted in the US. I know some of our training partners, especially within the EU, have raised eyebrows when we raise this up and say, look, it occurs in the country every year. So how can you defend and say that it's a foreign animal disease in the United States? I'm not going to attempt to even answer that question. So that brings me to the conclusion of my list of selected diseases, transboundary diseases. I would say that the discovery of African horse sickness in Thailand and Malaysia last year is a wake-up call, not only of this disease, but also of other diseases that are currently transboundary with respect to this country, the United States. Potential for disease transfer between countries is an inherent risk associated with international movement and trade in equines. We have to face that reality. However, continued vigilance and a concerted effort on the part of those that are engaged in the equine industry will be essential if we are to be successful in maintaining country freedom from these and other transboundary diseases. As the old saying goes, forewarned is forearmed. We know what we're faced with. We need to educate ourselves across a much wider swathe of the veterinary profession and membership of the equine industry. People need to be aware of these diseases, at least have some semblance of knowledge of what these diseases represent, how they might present, so that something doesn't come in and somebody says, it's nothing. It's ulcerative lymphangitis, and not realize that what they're looking at is in fact a transboundary disease. So that concludes my presentation. And now I have just a couple of comments I'd like to make specifically about significance. Last slide, if you wouldn't mind. It's only an image of, do you have one, Cliff? No?
I must have lost it in the transfer. Let me see if I can pull it up.
Don't worry in the slide. It's an electron photomicrograph of SARS-CoV-2, the cause of COVID-19. You might say, why should I even mention or take up any time whatsoever to mention it? Well, specifically, coronaviruses have been known, certainly in horses going back to the early 1970s. They've been known in a wide range of domestic and livestock species from, there we are. And there it is with its typical fringe. Have been known from transmissible gastroenteritis in swine to winter dysentery to cattle to infectious bronchitis in poultry and so on and so on. So they do exist. And interestingly enough, SARS-CoV-2 is totally distinct. It says bears no relationship whatsoever to any other coronavirus that has been hitherto isolated and characterized from any of our domestic and livestock species. Interestingly enough, if we look at the equine coronavirus, it really is an enteric pathogen primarily, although it can, affected horses can display other signs, but it is. So it's not primarily a respiratory transmitted infection, or rather an enteric transmitted infection. In total contrast to SARS-CoV-2, which is transmitted by infective aerosolized respiratory secretions, not via the enteric route primarily. And why should I even mention this information as a lead up to, why should I comment on this? Well, relatively recently, there was an interesting article that was entitled Horses Could Be Susceptible to COVID-19 Infection. It appeared in Horse Care. And it was interesting in the sense that it raised the specter that really and truly we don't know whether, in fact, this virus has the ability to infect horses or indeed give rise to clinical signs. Way back last year, about a year ago, there was a piece in the Equine Disease Quarterly in the July issue where I tried to lay out what the information was. And I drew upon some of the excellent and very elegant studies where they looked at, in fact, whether particular species of vertebrates, especially mammalia, had or the receptors that basically the virus itself could attach and infect cells in those species. And they included horses. There was one that examined 410 vertebrate species, of which 252 were mammalian. And they looked at both Equus caballus and Equus assum. So basically they were looking at donkeys as well as horses. And what they found was that there was a very low risk of, if you were to predict or postulate that in fact a horse was susceptible to infection and possibly clinical disease on them. There was a very low risk that in fact could happen. So all I'd say at this stage is there is no evidence, either A or any reports, that in fact horses have become infected from contact with humans that were shedding SARS-CoV-2, or indeed have we any evidence that horses have been infected and that there's horse-to-horse transmission of that virus, or indeed whether infected horses can back transmit the virus itself to the horses, to the handlers that in fact come in contact with them. So the jury is out. We really don't know, but there's certainly no evidence at this juncture to suggest, and there's any support for contending that in fact the horse is likely to be infected with this virus in the absence of credible scientific information to support that contention. Thanks, Liv.
Thank you, Dr. Timmy. I really do appreciate the presentation you gave and the information you shared. And you know, it's important to highlight the threats that are around us all the time and have already been here before, and we've addressed them previously, but we certainly don't want to go back and have to do any of that another go round. So thank you very much for your time, Dr. Timoney. We appreciate it. I would also like to highlight that on Friday, Dr. Timoney is receiving the Hickey Award. So please pencil that into your schedule, be part of that presentation. I don't see any questions in the comments, for the sake of time, we are going to breeze through the new business section of our agenda. We have several new business items from our speakers, which I greatly appreciate. But any of you on the call, if you have anything you think should come to the forefront of the Health and Regulatory Committee at the American Horse Council, I encourage you to contact me at cwilliamson@horsecouncil.org, and I will make sure I get it in front of them at their next meeting. With that, I'll pass the baton off to Julie. I think she has some closing comments to round out the day. And then if I could ask the committee members to stay on the line, but everyone else to please drop off after Julie's comments, I would be very appreciative for our closed session.
Well, I want to say thanks to everyone for all of their presentations, an excellent job, some great materials that was there. I'd like to remind you that tomorrow we convene at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Tomorrow is the first time that we're attempting what we're calling a state legislative day. And we are honored to have Amy Showalter of the Showalter Group kick us off. She is a very well-respected and noted speaker and author on grassroots advocacy. So I think you'll really enjoy hearing what she's got to say and walk away with a number of tips and tricks to put in our arsenal when we're trying to campaign for a particular legislative item. And then we have some state presenters that we'd like to hear from that are going to talk about some things that are going on in their states specific to the industry. So it should be a wonderful panel discussion tomorrow morning from 10 to noon. And that's all I have, Cliff. So with that, I'm going to monitor while our guests drop off to make sure that we just have the committee, and we'll go into closed session so we can see how to proceed.
Great. Thank you, Julie. And thank you, everybody, for attending today's committee meeting. I really appreciate your time.